Before anything else, this opening moment shows why the pressure around Trump is suddenly becoming much bigger than normal politics.
Well, US President Donald Trump is facing calls to be impeached after he drew criticism with fiery message on Iran. Trump continued his polarizing rhetoric on Easter Sunday, delivering an expletive-laden attack on Iran that sparked criticism on Capitol Hill and beyond. Trump renewed his threat to unleash heavy bombing on Iranian power plants and bridges if Tehran refused to unblock the Strait of Hormuz.
Trump's latest threat toward Iran has created one of those moments where Washington stops pretending this is just another political fight. This is not just another Trump post, another loud statement, another headline that burns hot for a day and disappears. This time, the reaction is different because the people responding are not just commentators, online critics, or cable news panels. The reaction is coming from senators, representatives, and elected officials who are openly talking about impeachment, the 25th Amendment, constitutional violations, and whether the president is actually fit to keep holding power. And that is why this story matters. Once lawmakers start speaking in constitutional terms, the conversation moves beyond politics. It becomes a question of national safety, presidential judgment, and whether the system still has the courage to respond when a president crosses a dangerous line. The next part explains why Trump's entire image of control is now being tested in public.
The constitutional provision came into existence after confusion following the death of President John F. Kennedy. The U.S. Congress approved the amendment in 1965 and it got ratified in 1967. The amendment created a legal mechanism for designating a head of state when the president is disabled or dead. It formalizes the practice for the vice president to permanently take over. The vice president and a majority of the cabinet members can declare the president as unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. And if the president disputes this, then 2/3 of the U.S. Congress can vote to put the vice president in charge. This is not the first time Trump is facing impeachment threats. The U.S. president has undergone 2 separate impeachment trials under a separate provision in 2020 and 2021. Both ended in his acquittal, making Trump the only president to have faced 2 impeachment trials.
For years, Trump has built his entire public image around one idea, that he is untouchable. He wants his supporters to believe that no investigation can stop him, no scandal can weaken him, no court can control him, and no political pressure can shake him. That has always been part of his brand. He presents himself as the man who survives everything. But what is happening now shows that even that image has limits. The pressure building around him is not just about personality anymore. It is about whether a sitting president can speak casually about the destruction of an entire civilization and still be treated as someone safely in control of the most powerful office on earth. Now the focus shifts to the statement that pushed this controversy into constitutional territory.
President Trump has issued a 48-hour deadline to Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said that if Tehran does not open the Strait of Hormuz, then the US will hit and obliterate their power plants. Iran has renewed threats against the region's infrastructure after US President Donald Trump's threats. Iranian military's operational command, Qassam al-Anbiya, said, I quote here, if Iran's fuel and energy infrastructure is violated by the enemy, all energy, information technology, and desalination infrastructure belonging to the US and the regime in the region will be targeted.
The trigger was Trump's language about Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. According to the script, Trump posted that a whole civilization could die and warned that Iran's infrastructure could be annihilated if the Strait of Hormuz was not reopened. That is not normal diplomatic language. That is not a standard warning. That is not the usual hard talk presidents sometimes use during tense foreign policy moments. When the President of the United States uses words that sound like civilizational destruction, people inside government have to take that seriously, because the president is not just some commentator talking into a microphone. The president has war powers, military command, intelligence access, and the ability to trigger consequences that can affect millions of people. This is where one senator's response turns the argument from outrage into impeachment pressure.
We sat down with Saeed Gholami, a local doctor who donned his bullhorn in the first days of the war. He says Iranians want the U.S. to keep bombing the regime.
If you're a father and you have no food for your children, and it has gotten worse in the last 10 years, what do you think is going to happen for the next 10 years? You would rather die.
Despite President Trump's shifting rhetoric and threats to strike infrastructure like power plants and bridges.
It went from help is coming in January to now a whole civilization will die. How do you wrap your head around these differing statements?
The Iranians in Iran are still hopeful that they believe this is like an overestimation or oversell of what's going to happen. I believe they mean the Shia like mullah civilization type of, like the Islamic Republic civilization.
That is why Senator Ed Markey's response matters. He did not just criticize Trump. He called on the House to reconvene and pass articles of impeachment. That is a major escalation. Impeachment is not supposed to be a casual reaction. It is the most serious constitutional tool Congress has for dealing with a president accused of abusing power or endangering the country. When a sitting senator says the House should come back specifically to impeach the president, that tells you he believes this is not just offensive rhetoric. He believes it is a constitutional emergency. The next reaction makes the story even more serious because it questions judgment, not just policy.
I worry that we risk losing a little bit of perspective on some of the watershed moments here by reacting with equal outrage to every revelation. So yes, the president or the administration should have disclosed this meeting at the G20, but it was in a public setting with a whole bunch of other G20 leaders. The watershed moment here is, of course, the Donald Trump Jr. meeting, which may be the fire underneath all the smoke that we've been waiting for. But I think there's a little bit of a sort of perpetual motion machine now to react with equal outrage to every daily revelation. I'm not as worried about the G20.
Then Senator Chris Murphy made the argument even sharper. He said no president in control of his senses would publicly threaten to erase an entire people. That sentence changes the entire frame of the conversation. Murphy was not simply saying Trump made a bad foreign policy decision. He was questioning Trump's capacity. He was questioning whether the president is mentally and emotionally stable enough to handle the power he has. And when a United States senator publicly says something like that, it naturally raises the question of the 25th Amendment, because that amendment exists for moments when the president may be unable to discharge the duties of the office. Now the legal argument enters the story, and this is where the pressure becomes harder to dismiss.
Planes. And as you know, Major, the hope was that he would get 500 planes. He got no commitment from China to stop holding rare earths and critical minerals as a monopoly. They still may run out in supplying them to us at the end of the year. He got no commitment for them to stop their subsidies. And he took Wall Street leaders and other business leaders to beg for $1 trillion of investment in America for Chinese factories that would put more Americans out of work.
Representative Ro Khanna also pushed the argument into legal territory. He said threatening war crimes violates the Constitution and the Geneva Conventions, and he called for the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. That is important, because Khanna is not only making a moral argument. He is making a legal argument. He is saying Trump's language is not just dangerous, but potentially connected to violations of constitutional limits and international law. When a lawmaker invokes both the Constitution and the Geneva Conventions in response to a president's public statement, the issue is no longer just tone. It is whether the president is threatening actions that the law itself forbids. The next detail shows how Trump's defenders may try to explain this away, but why critics say the line was still crossed.
Democrats attacking the president's handling of the conflict. In response to this post, where Mr. Trump used an expletive and told Iran it'll be, quote, living in hell if it doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz by tomorrow, former Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene wrote in part, quote, he has gone insane. She also said, this is not making America great again. This is evil. Joel Payne and Rena Shaw are here to discuss this and more. Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist.
Trump's defenders will try to explain this away. They will say he was using deterrence. They will say strong leaders use strong language. They will argue that Iran needed to hear a serious threat. They will say Democrats are exaggerating because they want another impeachment fight. And yes, presidents do sometimes use forceful language in international conflicts. But there is a difference between warning an adversary and speaking in terms that sound like wiping out a civilization. That difference matters. Deterrence is one thing. Civilizational destruction is something else entirely. This is where the foreign policy danger becomes much bigger than one statement or one headline. The Strait of Hormuz also makes this more serious. This is not a small regional issue. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important routes for global energy movement. If that area becomes unstable, the impact can spread through oil markets, shipping lanes, military alliances, and global prices. So when Trump threatens Iran over that region, he is not just talking about one country. He is speaking into one of the most sensitive geopolitical pressure points in the world. That is why reckless language here is so dangerous. It can affect enemies, allies, markets, and military planning all at once. The next part explains why lawmakers are now openly discussing the most extreme constitutional tool against a president. That is also why the 25th Amendment conversation is becoming louder. The 25th Amendment is not a normal political weapon. It was designed for a president who cannot perform the duties of the office. Most people think about that in medical terms: a stroke, coma, severe illness, or obvious incapacity. But now lawmakers are asking a harder question. What happens when the president is physically present, but his behavior is so reckless that people begin to doubt whether he can safely exercise power? That is a difficult constitutional question, but it is now being asked publicly. According to the script, more than 80 House Democrats have made public statements calling for Trump's cabinet to consider invoking the 25th Amendment. That is not a small number. One or two lawmakers could be dismissed as dramatic. A few progressives could be dismissed as partisan. But more than 80 House Democrats publicly raising cabinet removal means the concern has moved into a much wider lane. This is no longer just a fringe demand. It has become part of the serious political response to Trump's Iran threat. Now the story becomes even more serious because two different removal paths are being discussed at the same time. At the same time, impeachment is also being discussed. That creates two tracks of removal pressure. The first track is impeachment, which belongs to Congress. The House can pass articles of impeachment, and the Senate can hold a trial and vote on removal. The second track is the 25th Amendment, which would require the Vice President and Cabinet to act. These are very different processes, but the fact that both are being discussed at the same time shows how serious the moment has become. The system is not just criticizing Trump. It is discussing the tools that exist to remove a president. Trump himself seems to understand the danger. According to the script, he has warned Republicans that if they lose the House, Democrats will impeach him. That admission is important because Trump usually wants to sound fearless. He wants to sound like nothing can touch him. But when he tells Republicans that impeachment is coming if they lose control, he is admitting that his protection depends on political power. He is admitting that the Republican majority is the wall between him and congressional accountability. That puts Republicans in a very difficult position. Trump is basically telling them, protect me or they will come for me. But the thing they are being asked to defend is not a normal policy disagreement. They are being asked to stand behind a president who used language about a civilization dying. That is hard to defend, especially when war powers and international law are involved. Republicans now have to choose between loyalty to Trump and the basic question of whether they are comfortable with this kind of presidential rhetoric. Some Republicans will defend him no matter what. That is obvious. Some will say he was just being tough. Some will say Democrats are overreacting. Some will stay quiet and hope the story fades. But silence also has consequences. If the situation escalates, every silent Republican will be asked why they said nothing when the president talked like this. That is the political danger Trump creates for his own party. He says the extreme thing, and then everyone else has to either defend it, condemn it, or hide from it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other progressives have also kept impeachment pressure alive even after Trump announced or supported a tentative ceasefire. Their argument is important because they are saying the ceasefire does not erase the original issue. If Trump threatened or initiated military action without proper congressional authorization, then the constitutional violation already happened. A temporary pause does not undo an abuse of war powers. A ceasefire may reduce immediate danger, but it does not erase the question of whether the president crossed constitutional lines. That point matters because people often judge foreign policy only by the outcome. If the crisis cools down, they say everything is fine. But constitutional accountability does not work that way. If a president violates the law or abuses power, the later outcome does not automatically erase the violation. If someone drives through a red light and does not crash, they still broke the rule. The same logic applies here. If Trump used unauthorized force or threatened illegal destruction, the fact that the crisis later cooled down does not make the original conduct acceptable. This is why lawmakers keep talking about Congress's role in war powers. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. Presidents have broad authority as commander-in-chief, but that authority is not unlimited. When a president moves toward conflict without valid congressional authorization, Congress has a responsibility to respond. That responsibility becomes even more urgent when the president is using language that suggests extreme, possibly illegal military action. Ro Khanna's mention of the Geneva Conventions also matters because it reminds people that even war has rules. A president cannot simply threaten anything he wants because he is angry or because he wants to look strong. There are limits on targeting, proportionality, civilian harm, and collective punishment. When the president uses broad language about a whole civilization, critics hear something that sounds far beyond lawful military targeting. That is why the legal alarm bells are ringing. The public pressure and procedural pressure are now feeding each other. Public pressure is what you see in statements, interviews, social media posts, and speeches. Procedural pressure is what happens when impeachment articles are drafted, committees hold hearings, lawyers prepare arguments, and lawmakers count votes. A scandal becomes more serious when both are happening at the same time. And that is what appears to be happening here. The outrage is public, but the response is also becoming procedural. That is what makes this moment different from ordinary Trump controversy. Trump has had countless controversies. He has said extreme things before. He has triggered outrage before. But not every controversy activates impeachment talk, 25th Amendment demands, Geneva Convention arguments, and public statements from senators questioning his fitness. This one has done that because it touches the most dangerous power a president has, the power to lead the country into conflict. There is another layer here, too. Trump's whole political strategy depends on turning every criticism into a loyalty test. If you criticize him, you are against the movement. If you question him, you are helping the enemy. If you demand accountability, you are part of a witch hunt. That strategy works well in normal partisan fights, but it becomes weaker when the issue is war, because war is bigger than Trump. Military decisions are bigger than party loyalty. The consequences can be measured in lives, not just votes. That is why the oath matters. Every senator, representative, cabinet member, and military officer swears an oath to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump. That oath means something, or at least it is supposed to. If the president uses language lawmakers believe is dangerous or unlawful, they have a duty to respond. They cannot simply say, well, he is our party leader. The Constitution is supposed to come before party loyalty. This moment is testing whether that still means anything. The Republican coalition is under pressure because Trump has made this a loyalty test, whether they want it or not. If they defend him, they own the language. If they criticize him, they risk his anger and his base. If they stay silent, they look weak. That is why moments like this are so politically dangerous. They force people to choose, and the choices they make can follow them for years. Trump's own prediction about impeachment also shows that he is watching the political map carefully. He knows if Republicans lose the House, the protective barrier weakens. He knows Democrats will have more power to investigate, subpoena, hold hearings, and move articles of impeachment. That is why the midterms matter so much in this story. This is not only a fight about Iran, it is also a fight about whether Trump can keep enough political control to avoid accountability. If Democrats gain more power, impeachment becomes more likely. If Republicans hold the House, they can block or slow that process. That is the political reality Trump understands. But the fact that he is openly warning about impeachment shows that he knows the pressure is not fake. He knows this is not just social media noise. He knows the constitutional machinery could move if the political balance changes, and that is why his invincible image is starting to look less solid. Trump can still dominate headlines. He can still command loyalty from much of the Republican Party. He can still turn criticism into fundraising and political energy, but the more extreme his conduct becomes, the more the system is forced to talk about tools designed for extreme situations. That alone weakens the image of total control. Now it is important to be realistic. Removal is still difficult. Impeachment may be possible in the House, but Senate conviction requires a much higher threshold. The 25th Amendment would require the vice president and cabinet, which is even harder because those people are inside Trump's own administration. So nobody should pretend removal is easy or automatic. It is not. The Constitution makes removal difficult on purpose. But the point is not only whether removal happens tomorrow. The point is that the conversation has reached that level. Even if Trump is not removed, this pressure still matters. It creates a record. It forces lawmakers to take a side. It shapes the way voters see the midterms. It gives future historians a clear picture of who spoke up and who stayed silent. It also warns future presidents that certain language can trigger constitutional consequences. Accountability is not only about the final vote. Sometimes accountability begins when officials refuse to normalize dangerous conduct. Trump's defenders will keep saying this is political theater. But it is hard to call it only theater when multiple lawmakers are invoking different constitutional mechanisms at the same time. Markey is calling for impeachment. Murphy is questioning Trump's control and fitness. Khanna is pointing to the Constitution and Geneva Conventions. More than 80 House Democrats are reportedly calling for cabinet action. Ocasio-Cortez and progressives are keeping impeachment pressure alive even after ceasefire talk. And Trump himself is warning Republicans that impeachment will come if they lose the House. That is not one isolated reaction. That is a pattern. The key issue now is whether that pattern grows. If Trump escalates again, the pressure will grow.